Hello and welcome to my presentation called Fronteras and Frontiers, Borderland Environmental Justice. I've chosen a category based on a geographical region rather than a theme of conflict or environmental impact because I'm really interested in the United States-Mexican border basically being a site of multiple injustices, some of which are environmental, some of which are social. And I think this area is really worth our attention for a few reasons. First of all, um, it's a striking contrast between global southern and northern contexts. It's really where these two contexts meet and rub up against each other. Meanwhile, the historical contestation of the boundary between the United States and Mexico has kind of built the foundation for disregard of the region's social and ecological continuity. And what I mean by that is there's 26 indigenous groups whose territories often span both sides of the border. The ecosystem is characterized by a delicate water system, also traversing this political boundary. And these water systems sustain life in what is normally just a desert and mountainous landscape. Furthermore, the fragmentary government surrounding this and policing of these borders creates a really weakened system of environmental accountability, which corporate interests often exploit. Um, and then there's this idea about paradoxical open and closed space. On the one hand, you have a very open movement of capital, labor, toxic waste granted by the North Atlantic Trade Agreement, Free Trade Agreement, rather, sorry. At the same time, you have a more closing space because of political pressures put on the humans and the life that has occupied this area for much longer than the nations have claimed legitimacy to. So on the open space side of things, since the agreement of NAFTA, industries in the United States and Mexican border have often illegally dumped burned waste, causing immense environmental damage. These factories are known as maquiladoras, which exploit cheap labor and don't have to pay taxes. The maquiladoras are a huge source of pollution and contamination, and there's been multiple studies to show this. A famous successful example of action taken against them was the case of the Metales and Derivados battery recycling company in Tijuana and San Diego, where an alliance of women from both sides of the border were effectively able to leverage languages of environmental justice and the lack of eco-services to close down the plant and gain remuneration from the governing bodies on both sides. However, success is usually the exception rather than the norm on the border, which with the case of seen in the case of the ongoing joint Mexican and American energy exploitation in the Burgos Basin of Nuevo León. The gas shale fracking continues to go on since 2014, and despite resistance, has contaminated about 400 groundwater wells. Likewise, the informal labor movements coming to the border has caused urban water disparities on the American side of things. Since 1950, Texas border towns have swelled with over 400,000 poor migrant workers residing in haphazard shanty towns called colonias. And despite funding being provided, local landlords and leaders refuse to allocate any budget for things like basic access to basic water and sanitation services. Meanwhile, you have this enclosing space, in the famous examples of the border walls, pretty much since the Clinton administration intensified through the Bush administration and now coming to just a ridiculous head with the Trump administration. The cult of wilderness discourse can be found in environmental groups who have protested the landfilling in places like the Tijuana estuary. I think the Sierra Club was involved in some of these movements in 2004 to protect endangered species. On the other hand, you have the Tohono O'odham Nation, whose territory straddles Arizona and northern Mexico, the Sonora province. Their territory would be physically divided in half by separating the tribe's family, kinship, and territory by this proposal put forth by the Trump administration. So perhaps their claims to place and space and rootedness can be seen as more of an environmentalism of the poor. But finally, just in conclusion, I think the borderland is fascinating to me because it's not a category in itself. I would expect the atlas, would have some kind of filter for this, but apparently it's not. But it's certainly a place where we should be paying more and more attention to with the movement and migrations of people. It's a real political flashpoint. And for me, I think the most fascinating part about this this category is just what famous geographer and political economist David Harvey has pointed out, that behind every single environmental justice movement is a struggle to define social reality. In this case, the social reality is a political imaginary line divided what is normally a very continuous and integrated ecosystem and group of people. So the successful environmental movements, if there's a theme running through them on the border, it's that they disregard this the authority of this imaginary line. So thanks for now. That's it.